Morning, good afternoon, and to our European attendees, good evening, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar presented by Ziflow. My name is Mike Peterbaugh, and I'll be one of your hosts today. Let's just take care of some quick housekeeping items before we get started. Attendee lines are muted. That's just to cut down on background noise like leaf blowers and barking dogs, or in my case, 2-year-olds. Our session today is being recorded, and a copy will be sent out after we finish up today. We'll take questions at the end of today's presentation, but feel free to enter them at any time during the course of the webinar via the webinar's Q&A interface. Okay, let's get into it and let's meet our hosts. As I mentioned, my name is Mike Peterbaugh and I'm the CMO here at Ziflow. And today I'm joined by Will Liu, our VP of Ops, who is also responsible for our customer success strategy.
Hey guys, excited to have everyone on the webinar today.
I'm personally excited to have Will on the call today myself, as he has firsthand experience with how our customers are using Ziflow to demonstrate marketing compliance. And he's also going to show us later how our customers use Ziflow to meet those compliance requirements. So I'm pretty excited about that today. For those of you on the call who aren't familiar with Ziflow, we are singularly focused on innovating in the online proofing space. And what that means is that we help agencies and brands the world over solve their most pressing review and approval challenges. And that review and approval process is something that we're going to dig into pretty deeply today. Okay, why are we all here today? Today we're going to cover 4 ways to keep the creative process compliant. To prep us for this journey today, I've wanted to start off with some questions and then some quick background on why we here at Ziflow are very interested in this topic of marketing compliance. And before we get too deep in today's call, I want to draw just a quick distinction. Clearly we all, and if you're on this call, you clearly know all about GDPR and the absolute need for data privacy. However, GDPR and privacy of information aren't the only aspect of marketing compliance that bear scrutiny for marketers today, and that's why we're here. What we're going to focus on today is the process in which creative content, television commercials, social media content, banner ads, websites, even simple marketing brochures, the process through which all of those items are created. That's what we're going to focus on in the context of today's call. And we're going to examine how to impact compliance readiness through that creative process. So a few questions to consider as you start to think about that. Are there consistent steps in your creative process, in the content review process, and are they documented and enforced? We're going to cover the importance of that today for sure. Is there a firm understanding within your team or even your parallel teams of who needs to be involved in each project to be able to say that the right people approved the creative at the right time? Is access controlled? And lastly, how are all the milestones in the project captured for later review and analysis, and especially, quite frankly, auditing after the fact if that's the need to be. So let's start with the why. I wanted to share some quick background on why we think this is such an important topic. Last year, we here at Ziflow commissioned a survey, and we looked at the challenges that creative marketers were faced with. And to quickly cut to the chase, we saw 3 main themes rise to the top: content, collaborators, and compliance. So I'm just going to jump into these really quickly. So no surprise, the volume of creative content and creative content work, I should say, is pushing teams to a limit to what they can produce effectively. And spoiler alert, when I say effectively, I'm not just now talking about like great creative. Spoiler alert, effective could also be code for compliant. And these projects have more collaborators than ever before. And what I mean by collaborators is the people providing feedback, guidance, approvals. There are more of these people than ever before. And the methods of providing feedback haven't really improved to keep up with this trend. Just taking compliance out of the equation for a second, just being able to create and produce great quality creative work. The volumes and the methods of providing feedback to get that creative work done just haven't kept pace. Now, when you actually start to fold in the compliance requirements, which we'll talk about next, this is impacting timelines every day. And really, all of this rolls up into a crescendo around compliance. More content, more voices, more requirements, and now more, I don't want to call them restrictions, we'll just say that there's requirements. And again, we're seeing that those who are subject to compliance requirements are still relying on tools that could drag an eventual audit out. Email, paper-based notes for feedback, and yeah, believe it or not, still sticky notes. So for those 3 C's that we just quickly covered, content, collaborators, and compliance, when those come together, you can see why we're very interested in this topic. So let's roll into the 2 main areas where we see our customers encountering compliance requirements and potential challenges. So on one side, we have brand playbooks, and on the other, we have regulatory compliance. And I want to be very clear, these are not mutually exclusive. This is not like being right-handed or left-handed, unfortunately. Many organizations, and looking at the attendee list for those who joined us this morning, I know that many of these organizations are subject to both types of compliance requirements. When it comes to brand playbooks, you're most concerned with your brand and how it's being displayed and positioned in your respective market. The example shown here is an excellent, I mean, I really am impressed with this, by the way, as a one-pager from the University of Georgia, of all places. Maybe for those of you in SEC country, you don't doubt this, that you know, SEC schools take their brand very seriously. I think all colleges do and universities do, quite frankly, but I'm really impressed with this University of Georgia one-pager. It goes into proper logo usage, color palettes, verbiage, or taglines, as we like to call them in the marketing world. And of course, the proper uses of trademark and other brand ownership designations. It's a really impressive one-page doc. You know, many of you on this call probably see this and like, oh, that's cute. You know, your brand playbook might be 25 pages long. On the previous slide, I used the NASA example, which if you haven't seen it, Google it. The NASA style guide is one of the more impressive documents you'll ever see as far as a style guide is concerned. It's really, really cool, and it's really detailed. But yeah, this you know, University of Georgia one-pager is actually pretty impressive as a very quick one-pager brand playbook. On the other side, with regards to regulatory compliance, it almost always starts with disclosures, 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 and then it quickly moves on to product packaging, weights, and measure, which again, probably just another form of disclosures you'd probably consider it, but also claims made by the product's marketing. And this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. So please don't use this as your primary checklist. There's also a rapidly growing body of law aimed at advertising, which is directed at children, which I think is great. So now that we have the context set, let's start talking about some best practices. It's ironic that branding and compliance have a similar foundational element, and that's consistency. So for any type of compliance and brand building, quite frankly, consistency is key. So to be able to demonstrate an enforced, repeatable process and accomplishing that, really any measured activity, I would say, is a big part of staying compliant. So we're going to talk about the process first, but this is as much about people as it is the process. And we'll be talking about that in just a few slides. So creative structure, and like the title of the slide says, this does not have to be an oxymoron. What is important is that your creative review process can hold up to scrutiny. How would it do that? There's several angles to consider. I've listed out a few questions here that you can start asking yourself. You know, specifically when we're talking about developing creative content in a compliant manner, we're talking about looking at how the review and approval process is actually carried out. You know, do you have different processes for different types of content? Video versus print, print versus digital, et cetera, et cetera. And that's okay if you do. I think you know, the most important thing is that you fall back and you actually have a process that you can build off of and expand and alter as well as needed. Do contributors and approvers have involvement at each stage of production? You know, there's at one point, I make this point a little bit later in the presentation, but we can make it again today too, is, you know, one thing to consider is that regardless of their role and their depth of role, anyone added to a particular project for review and approval becomes part of the compliance chain. So do they need access and really notifications around every stage? Are all the milestones in a review process accounted for? That's really important. And we're going to talk about auditability a little bit later. And the last point on this slide is a really important one. And when Will and I were going over the slides last week for this webinar, he had me add this, and I think it's just a super important point that I just want to call out specifically, is that a repeatable process not only keeps you compliant, but it's usually a lot more efficient as well. And we're going to talk about that a few more times as we go through the presentation today. But we definitely don't want to kind of paint this picture of compliance being a restrictive or non-value added component to adding into the creative process. If you're going to be able to wring some more efficiency out of the process in the long run, there's nothing bad about that at all. So yeah, I think that's a really important point to make, and I'm glad that I'm glad that Will had me add that.
Yeah, and then Mike, I just want to actually touch on that point a little bit more, if you don't mind. So
yeah, please.
What we mean by that, what I've seen consistently is a lot of times within the workflow, cycles end up getting repeated. A very typical workflow we see is you may have, especially in healthcare, for instance, you may have a technical review or a subject matter review, so a science review, for lack of a better term, and then copy review. In a non-compliant workflow, sometimes we've seen where copy goes, reviews, they even approve it before the technical team or the subject matter expert team even gets a chance to take a look at it. And what that does is it causes massive inefficiency because they just reviewed and approved something that the subject matter experts may not have looked at yet. So then after the technical team takes a look at it, they have to go back in there and review and approve it again. And that's creating extra work. So what we've seen is when you have really compliant workflows, it actually eliminates a lot of that rework because teams don't get in there too early, or they're not giving their stamp of approval before really they can have the ability to give their stamp of approval. And the most typical case I see that is technical review. The copy team gets in there before the technical team does. The copy team says, from a copy perspective, it looks great. The grammar's correct. It's been proofread correctly, but the subject might not be correct yet. And now after the subject team approves it, copy has to get back in there. And you can eliminate a complete round by making sure that copy never takes a look at it. Copy never gives it their stamp of approval until the technical team gets their chance to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. And actually, I just saw a question pop up through the Q&A interface. I think that actually asked that. So we'll cover that toward the end. But yeah, I think compliance, it can definitely have some additional benefits beyond just demonstrating compliance, making your core processes even more efficient and beneficial over time. I mean, there's real dollar costs associated with that as well. I'm going to get out of presentation mode. For some reason, the next slide wasn't loading properly, so I'm just going to go see if I can do it this way. No, still not loading properly. So we're going to get into best practices anyway. Sorry, my graphic is not showing up on the left-hand side. We'll see if we can clean that up when we send out a copy of the presentation today. But let's start talking about best practices, and we're going to get into the importance of team member involvement in just a few slides. But let's start to talk about the process of collaboration itself. And Will kind of touched on this just a moment ago with his example. But I want to talk about best practices that we start with most often with our customers in developing workflow templates for how to approach content that is subject to any type of compliance requirement. Again, they could be brand playbooks, internal corporate standard requirements, or again, regulatory requirements. Here we found that documenting the entire route, the in and the out, is the best first step in identifying gaps, but also identifying areas to become more efficient, just like Will was just talking about. This often starts on a whiteboard where we literally map out where is the content coming from, who needs to see it first, the stages in between, and then who's got the final sign off. And We recognize the need to vary the templates for the types of creating being produced. That's a given. There's going to be different subject matter experts. There's going to be different teams, video team versus the copy team versus, a design team consistently. But once you have those steps documented, you can start to assemble the individual team members or the chess pieces on the board, or groups. That works too. I want to, definitely give a disclaimer when I say team members, that you could easily switch them out for entire groups as well. That'll be involved. I think that's an important distinction as well. So let me go to the next slide and see if I can go back into presentation mode really quickly. All right, now my graphics are loading. Sorry for that. A few more best practices around workflows and setting out some repeatable process flows where you can is to automate the management of the process. And when I say management, I'm using air quotes. You can't see me, but I am. I'm using air quotes when I say management. And what I mean by that is like the overhead tasks, the notifications, reminders, even the routing. Stuff that if you had a robot, you would give the robot to do for you on your behalf so that you didn't have, or a team member didn't have to send out reminders and project notifications. The additional benefit is that that these things were done and they're part of I don't want to say cookie cutter, but they're part of an established regimented process. So the right people, and we'll talk about people later, or teams, of course, are getting notified about either reminders that they need to review a proof, or that a new project has been kicked off to begin with, or that a decision is waiting on them. Also think about where you can utilize parallel review processes versus serial ones. If there are two groups whose feedback can be useful to each other, have them review their parts together. That's just, I think that's, again, another great efficiency gain that you could identify just by mapping out your process on a whiteboard to begin with. And also, and I know Will's got a lot of experience with this, so Will, please jump in on this. I think there's a lot of value challenging the notion, like you mentioned before, that each stage or step needs to be followed for each new version created. That might sound like a compliance red flag, but what we're talking about here is assets making their way to production use, not necessarily the work in progress stages. And I think this is just another example of becoming more efficient. Will, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Not to that, but I think touching on stages is actually a really good point. One thing that I see really way too often, surprisingly, is people don't label their stages correctly. And that's probably a workflow best practice that for compliance purposes, that's a really easy win that has massive gains, especially as you get into auditing. So making sure that your stages are labeled correctly for the different compliance stages that you need to hit. So if you have legal review, let's make sure that we label it legal review. If you have QA review, let's make sure that we label that stage QA review. And this way you're not dependent on tribal knowledge. If an audit hits and they need to know who did the legal review 3 years ago, you may not remember that this person was the counsel then, or this person was on the QA team then, but you can go right back to that stage and make sure the stage is correct. So I think there's a lot of importance in the stages of making sure that you're hitting the right stages when you need to, but also just simply labeling the stages correctly so that when you do have to go through an audit or you do have to pull a proof that was approved 5 years ago, even if you don't know who any of the reviewers are, you know exactly what function they played on that proof.
Will, while you're talking about stages, maybe you could just jump into the last point about identifying key contributors who might participate in multiple stages.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is one of those things that helps a lot with compliance and helps a lot with efficiency. So I really see this a lot when people are building their workflow. They get into the habit of really kind of thinking in silos of this person should only be a part of this stage, or this person should only be a part of this stage. Where I think that a lot of benefits and efficiency can be gained is if you put key contributors in multiple stages. So for example, you may want the design team or the creative team to be a part of, obviously, the creative review stage for the brand guidelines, but you may also want them a part of the legal review stage so that they can provide context and they can provide details to the legal team. and allow for that back and forth to happen as well. So when I really sit down and map out the workflow of people, what I really try to focus on is not just the stages that happen throughout a workflow, but who is a part of each stage and who else they need to collaborate with. So if we're building out the legal stage, my first question's always got to be, who does legal need to talk to outside of the legal team? And does it make sense to bring those contributors into that stage with them?
And I think that's a great segue to our next set of slides, which is, we've talked about the process side, and we've talked and alluded to the very important role that people play. So let's talk about people. A quick flashback to this earlier slide. If you recall, feedback processes are really putting a strain on project timelines, but they also have a direct impact on compliance as well. This gets compounded when you consider that 80% of the creative marketers we surveyed are using legacy tools to provide feedback. And when you start to think about auditing, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, when you start to think about auditing and looking at which changes were or were not made, and who provided which feedback, which may have turned us down to a maybe a non-compliant path, who wants to go and mine a 700-page long email thread? So I think this is really something. It's really we can't state enough about how important this is, because it gets compounded, and this all adds up. I have another graphic issue. I'm wondering if so I apologize. I think Zoom's having a little bit of issue with Google Slides today. So I'll just get out of presentation mode. There's an ad for a Sony PlayStation here, which I wanted to use as an industry example, where poor collaboration led to a tangible compliance fail. An ad for a Sony PlayStation handheld device. That was the PS Vita. It demonstrated some cross-platform gaming capabilities that actually didn't ship with the product. So these cross-platform capabilities were a major reason people wanted to buy the product. They were shown in the ad. This ad went public and was out and used in production. It was used in billboards in Times Square. So this led to a misleading, although I believe it was probably unintentionally a misleading ad, but it was misleading nonetheless, and that resulted in a fine and refunds. So there's hard dollar costs associated with a collaboration miss, which is a nice segue, and let me go back to presentation mode, which is a nice segue to our next slide. So it's absolutely critical that the right people at the right time are involved in the process, especially when it comes to compliance. I think that's true for any type of creative production process, but when it comes down to compliance, you definitely want to make sure that you've surveyed your team and determined who are the individual or groups required at each gate. Will's talked a lot about stages, and I use the term gate kind of interchangeably with stages. But it is important that someone can make the decision to move these things along. And you have to ask yourself, is it always the same people on the same route for each project, or does that change? It's also another important question to ask. And we've talked about this before. Should some individuals participate across one stage? The example like Will was just discussing. I think that might be definitely useful. And then really, is compliance complete or compliance sign-off the same as production ready? And is that designation made by different people? I think these are all really important questions you kind of have to ask yourself and the team as you start to map out the process from the beginning. Oh, just Zoom is killing me today. So who are these people that we're talking about? Let's talk about individuals, really. So subject matter experts, brand managers, copy editors, compliance managers, analysts. Actually, I've seen a bunch of these titles on the webinar today. They can all play a role. The important piece to remember is that the creative team members should be augmented with someone who is comfortable being responsible for knowing the requirements that particular piece of content faces outside of the creative brief. So, the creative brief is what set down the path, but there has to be someone that is comfortable with saying yes or no, that we have met the requirements of either our brand playbook or of the regulatory checklist before this can go live. Okay, so we've laid down the process. and now we've added in the people that we've automated, and we've automated what we can. What do we do if there's a mistake that gets put into production? A missing disclaimer, a brand color that was 3 shades off, or worse, a claim that can't be substantiated. It's time to not break the glass, it's time to audit the process. And this is actually a great exercise to do even without an audit fail or a compliance fail. I think this is really good to audit the process regularly. And as Will was saying, this is a great way to just uncover new efficiency gains on a regular basis. I'm not trusting any of my graphics now. That's really sad. So, this a big part of this is how do you demonstrate command and control over your processes? And really, at the kind of the basis, that's really what compliance is. Can you easily identify the who, what, when, and how a piece of creative content was produced? So, I had another flashback on this slide from one of our earlier slides. Of those who said they were under some types of compliance requirements, 46% of that cohort said they still rely on the antiquated channels to get work done. So that's email, printout. So to answer my previous questions for almost half of us, the answer is no, not really. Can we identify the who, the what, the when, and the where? So let's talk about best practices when it comes to auditing the process. All right, we got a graphic, who knew? Let's start at the end, decisions. Walking our way back actually might be the fastest way to determine where a process broke down. When a decision has been made, it's always helpful to capture as much information as to why the decision was made. I know personally, I'm just happy when something gets approved and I can move on and get this thing and get something into production. But obviously, if something doesn't get approved or changes are required, I want as much information as to why that didn't make it to the next step. But I think it's helpful to have information both ways. And I think this best practice is decision reasons. And I think it's super insightful when it comes time to audit the process. So again, we talked about automation a little bit earlier, and I think, kind of continuing our walk back approach. The idea of automation is, around the automating of routing and stages of a project. If this portion of the process is automated, you drastically reduce the chance that a key person misses a review. And this is probably a simple thing that could have been done. If you think back to the PlayStation example that we discussed earlier, where it was probably just a miscommunication between a product manager not seeing the most recent version and being able to say or communicate, hey, that actually didn't make it into the V1 release. We need to pull it from the ad. It could have been an honest mistake, but it was a mistake nonetheless. And that kind of takes us to our next best practice, which is documenting everything. And that might sound a little drastic, so let me explain. Having a process really at the beginning of the day or the end of the day is only half the story. You have to be able to demonstrate that the steps were followed, and it would be even better with an actual activity level log. And I think that'd be really important. And here's why. And let's go back to that PlayStation example again. If the agency and Sony had been able to demonstrate that everyone who needed to see the creative did, and reviews and sign-offs were done according to plan, and that the error was due to a truly an honest error as opposed to a breakdown of the process, then they still would have had a bad ad, but perhaps the fines would have been less severe. But not having that information, being able to demonstrate that they had a process in place and some level of controls in place, but not having that information is pretty much an indictment on the process, or really the lack thereof, itself. So, okay, that was a lot to take in, and I want to thank everyone for hanging with us this far. So I want to reward you with some real-world examples of how you would codify these best practices via an online proofing system like Ziflow. So at this point, I'm going to turn the phone over, or the call, I should say, over to Will for a moment, and he's going to take all of that theory we just talked about and put it to work with a little bit of a product demonstration. Will, it's all yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. So quick tech change. So I'm going to start presenting my screen now. And then Mike, since you're the only one unmuted, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Perfect. So I know Mike touched on a lot of different elements here on people, process, tracking, activity, and it can feel overwhelming at times to make sure that everything is in place so that you can successfully survive an audit and avoid the fines that he was talking about, or even just go back a couple years from now and figure out why an ad got pushed or why a creative got sent out to market. And what and while this could feel overwhelming and like there's a lot of steps, an online proofing tool like Ziflow really does simplify the process. I'm going to touch on a couple of different elements to highlight this here, but let's first talk about sending out a proof to review. Rather than working backwards from the decision, let's work forwards from I have a new asset that I need to send out to review, and I want to make sure that I'm hitting the right stakeholders, I'm hitting the right people at the right time to get them to review my proof. To do that, we rely on something we call automated workflow. Within Ziflow, you have the ability to create what we call a workflow template. Generically, I'm going to take a look at this one. It's called compliance review, since we're doing a compliance webinar. And this compliance review template outlines the different stages that my asset needs to go through before I can send it out to review. So it's really hitting all the key elements that I need to make sure that these people take a look at it and I get sign off from the technical team, the copy team, the creative team, the QA team, the client review team. I want to make sure I hit all those different elements and I hit all those different stages as I go through that review process. Now, a couple of things to talk about the workflow. These are templates. My number one question as I build through a workflow template with customers is really, are templates flexible or are they strict? What I mean by that is once the template gets applied, should that template be able to be modified? So you may have times where the template really is the guideline. So it needs to hit all these stages, but the people can change. So you may want to build a template that's flexible in the fact that I can add or remove reviewers to specific stages based off of the project need. Or I can build templates that are strict, which means that the template cannot be deviated from. These are my reviewers, these are my stages, and I need to ensure that we hit these reviewers and these stages every single time. So that's really the first consideration that I like to talk through with customers as we build their templates. Are these flexible? Are they strict? Or are they some sort of combination of the two? So you can have it where the reviewers are fixed, but I can remove stages. You can have it where the stages are fixed, but I can adjust reviewers. You can have it where the template's really a guideline and they can be adjusted, or you can have it where it's strict and no changes can be made. That's really a key point of compliance, because if you allow people to modify your template too much, they can skip key steps that they need to. But if you're too inflexible with your template, you may be causing inefficiencies. So for your templates, it's really a question about what steps need to be hit, and that's what you want to build into the templates. And then from there, you can make any adjustments that you need to. And the key things to consider as we're building out these templates are the stages. As I mentioned, stage names is probably my number one quick tip for everyone as they're building out their workflow. Consider your stage names and think of your stages as, when I look back on a project, I want to say, these guys looked at it or this group looked at it. That's the easiest way to set up your stage name most of the time. So if I know I need a technical review, I probably want to build a technical review stage. If I know I asked the question, hey, has copy taken a look at it yet? Then I probably need a copy review stage. So I really am a big fan of not overcomplicating stage names and really just building it on when I go, hey, did they take a look at it yet? Who are they? And those are typically the stages I build in my workflow. Now, once you have your stages, it's about building the right people and adding the right people into that stage. So here, within each stage in your workflow, you can define the reviewers within that stage and what their role is within that stage. As Mike and I mentioned earlier, there's going to be times where you want people in a single stage, and there's also going to be times where you want reviewers in multiple stages. So dependent on your workflow, I can choose to add a reviewer into multiple stages, like my creative director here, or I can choose to add a reviewer into a single stage. Really, the question is collaboration. Are they talking to people in other stages? If so, you may want to have them in multiple stages. If they're really focused on their specific function, copy is really only looking at copy, creative's really only looking at the design elements, legal's only looking at the terms and the disclaimers, then you may not need to add them to multiple stages. So there really is no one size fits all answer here. It's about how they're going to collaborate. And this is really one of the key areas that I like spending some time with the clients on as we talk about their workflows and figuring out what mix and match we need here, and obviously allowing the flexibility for adjustment. The other element is now we have stages, we have the right people, and Mike talked about this a lot, sending it to the right people at the right time. And that's where the trigger comes in. Triggers are what determine what moves it from stage to stage. So we can say here in this workflow, it only moves from the technical review stage to the copy review stage when the technical review team has approved it. This is really efficient because now copy isn't reviewing it before the subject matter experts get in there. So copy's only looking at it when they're supposed to, when we're needed. You can build a number of different triggers here. A really popular one that I see a lot is a trigger not just on approval, but also a trigger on when changes are required. So sometimes copy may say changes are required, and then you can send that to a different group like QA to make sure all the steps are accomplished. So your workflow can really branch into different paths depending on whether it's approved or whether changes are required. And I know I just spent a lot of time talking about the workflow, but this is one of those things that you want to spend a little bit extra time upfront setting up, making sure you have the proper workflow. You can build any number of workflows in an online proofing platform like Ziflow. I've seen workflows built for specific clients. I've seen workflows built for specific teams or workflows built for projects. So depending on how you want to adjust your workflows, you aren't limited to just one compliance review workflow. You can have a number of different workflows to make sure you're hitting on the right points per workflow. Now, the next element to this is going to be making sure that you're tracking everything. I know tracking everything seems like it could be a big, scary ask because there's so many different elements that you need to track. Who's a part of the proof, who looked at it, when they looked at it, what their comments are, when they made decisions, things like that. Now, this is where an online proofing platform like Ziflow becomes extraordinarily powerful and really saves a lot of time. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've had a client reach out to me in a panic and say, hey, well, we're being audited. I need this, this, and this right now, and I don't really know what to do. All I really do is I tell them to scroll down to their activity log and they get all their audit details there, or they can export the full activity log as a PDF as well. So the activity log is a really powerful tool and it helps you track everything automatically. So you're not worried about logging things like when the proof was sent out. You're not worried about logging things like when people have added comments. You're not worried about logging things like when people have opened a proof. All this happens automatically in real time. For example, let me go ahead and open this proof. I'm going to add a comment. So I've gone ahead, I have opened the proof, I've added a comment, and rather than having the need to track everything manually, if I go back to the activity section, I can see all of this is being tracked automatically by the system. It's timestamping when it was made, who made it, what they've done. So things such as open, comments, even decisions, all of this gets captured directly into the activity and audit log, as well as email notifications. And this is actually a key aspect, especially with some federal regulations. Not only do they want to see the asset, they want to see every email that's sent related to the asset. And that gets hard if you have to dig through your inbox, or if someone that was a part of the proof is no longer with the company, digging through an inbox that may no longer exist. So having not just activity log, but every message log becomes extraordinarily critical as well. And the final thing that Mike really touched on is decisions or logging decisions. So here we log decisions. If I say changes are required, that decision gets applied and that feeds into my activity log right away. But also things such as decision checklists, making sure that all the elements are hit when you're applying your decision. This could be confirming that product names are correct, confirming that phone numbers work. This could be a combination of brand compliance and regulatory compliance. This could focus solely on brand compliance, or this can focus solely on regulatory compliance as well. So there are elements that you absolutely want to check from a brand standpoint. Are we using the right product names? Do these phone numbers actually work? Are the URLs correct? But there may be regulatory elements where you need people to check or sign off that they've done it. And these, if say, I've checked these, ensured they're all correct, apply them as my decision reasons, these all get stored with my decision as well. So if I go and look here at the decision that was made, I can see that there was sign off on the decision checklist by Will when he approved it. So tracking everything becomes extraordinarily easy when you have an online proofing platform like Ziflow, because the tracking is automated. Around the commenting, the tracking is automated around the activity. All that happens in the background, and users are simply reviewing and approving the proof. And the workflow handles the routing, sending it to the right people at the right time. At any time, if an audit does come up, you can simply pull the activity log and you can export this information directly from Ziflow as well. So now you can just provide the activity log, or you can provide this PDF export of all the activity that's occurred on the proof. So really a great way to simplify the compliance tracking process, whether it's an internal review or external regulatory review.
That's awesome. Thank you, Will. Appreciate that overview. Yeah, I mean, I think, I talked about it a little bit earlier, and I tried to give the disclaimer that when we talk about tracking everything where possible, it's not as drastic as it sounds, really. I think Will did a great job of demonstrating that, it doesn't necessarily have to get in the way of anything else, but it can be incredibly additive, incredibly, accretive to a great process. So yeah, that was great. Thanks, Will. I'm going to go ahead and take back control. And we're going to go ahead and start wrapping it up today. Let's see if I can go back in present mode. Zoom wants to let me. That's great. So what did we cover today? This was a action-packed 40 minutes so far. And thank you for everyone for hanging with us. So today's key takeaways, and then we'll get into Q&A. The creative production process can be and really is the tip of the spear when it comes to meeting marketing compliance requirements. Legacy and analog tools were never designed to be probed later for audit trail purposes. I think the last half of Will's demonstration really showed you how hard it would be to do this with email, threads, and paper-based comment methods, et cetera, et cetera. Collaboration or lack thereof is often at the center of many compliance misses. Just not getting it to the right people at the right time. Based on the right stage logic, or just a really well thought out process, is the center of many compliance misses. And even if you don't work in a regulated industry, everything that we talked about today and everything that Will showed, your brand playbook is just as vital to your brand integrity, and definitely can derive a lot of value from a really regimented process that still allows creativity to flow. So with that, let's get into the Q&A. While Will was doing that great demo, I was able to gather a couple of questions here together. So the first questions, Will, I'll just kind of throw these back out to you. I'll see what I can jump in onto as well. I think there's two questions that are somewhat similar in nature. The first one was kind of basically mostly a product question, which is how does Ziflow handle versions and originals as part of the compliance process? And I think you showed the PDF process there, but there was a second related question, so I kind of want to handle these together. So, how does Ziflow handle versions and originals, but also sometimes we create a ton of versions before final approval. and it's really difficult and time consuming to pull the history of the asset. Is there a simpler way to do this? So do you want to talk just a little bit, Will, about like versions and controls, and then also, auditing a particular version?
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of having a proofing solution where you can have full version history. So within Ziflow, you can provide a full version history. You can create a first version, stack a second version on top of it, stack a third version on top of that. And then you'll have your full version thread. Now, because these are actually truly versioned, where I have a V1, V2, V3, V4, V, however many I need, and not just separate files I'm creating, when I'm pulling that export that I talked about earlier, we can actually pull across all versions. So when I need to look, I can say, give me this PDF export for this specific version, or give me a PDF export for all versions. So now pulling the information, I don't need to go to each individual version and see what happened there. I can generate one report across all versions.
Yeah, that's great. We have a question here, and Will, I know you work with a lot of our customers on this too, is kind of completing their MarTech stack. And this seems to be almost like a MarTech stack question, but maybe outside of MarTech even. Do your customers ever send final data? I'm guessing that might even be just decision data, but do your customers ever send final data to other apps that they might use to track work being done, like a PM or job management solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really typical example that we see is people want final decisions logged in another tool so that it's a little bit of the belts and suspenders approach, crossing their I's, dotting their T's. You have your final decisions, and those are always going to be associated with the proof in Ziflow, but they also want to make sure it's logged somewhere else just in case. So that's extraordinarily easy using the webhooks or even the API in Ziflow, where you can have events set up, and once final approval is made on a proof, that final approval can be sent to another system and logged in that system.
Yeah, I think, and really, I mean, the way we look at it here at Ziflow, just to kind of build on that is, I think that, where we're, happy and willing to work with our customers to integrate Ziflow with any of their modern SaaS apps, if they feel that their other apps will be enriched with proofing data, proofing project data, and decisions, I think we're all for it, absolutely. I love this next question, Will, because I don't think enough people think about this when they are reviewing different types of creative in different formats. How would you handle different formats of creative content for compliance? For example, if my video player, this sounds like this is an actual use case. For example, if my video player didn't show proper resolution of a video that I was asked to review and I missed something, how would we handle that? I think that this is a great question because, again, I don't think a lot of people consider that when they're either deciding to or not to use an online proofing system.
Yeah, I think for me, the one I see is actually with video, it comes up a lot now. With so many different video medium types, where you have to make a video for social, you have to make a video for YouTube, you have to make a video for broadcast, with so many different aspect ratios and so many different elements there, and the speed in which this content needs to be created now, a lot of stops in the traditional video production get missed. So you may be reviewing something that is 16:9, but then you don't even realize it's going to be outputted for 1:1. And now you're approving the video, not realizing that they're going to use the same video for social, and your terms are out of the title safe area and may have gotten cut off. So one of the unique tools that we really apply here is things such as the ability to apply your action safe and title safe areas on different aspect ratios. So as I'm adding my comments, I can confirm that everything falls into an action safe or title safe area. So with video approval especially, it's not just looking at the video asset, it's also considering things like making sure that video specific tools are available, such as action safe or title safe areas, because you absolutely don't want your disclosures being cut off because they're using the same video for social as they're using for their broadcast commercial.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. And that type of, really, if you're looking at it, as well as saying, different aspect ratios, I mean, at the end of the day, that's information asymmetry. You know, someone else is dealing with more information or less information because of their particular viewing situation. And that's not a good thing. And, you know, I think that's one of the great things about Ziflow is that it's kind of an abstraction layer between the actual format that it was, the asset was created in, and what you're viewing on the screen. Because, you know, it's all Ziflow is browser based. Everyone that is logging into Ziflow to review a proof is going to see the same thing. Now, there can be adjustments made, like Will was saying, about the safe zones and whatnot, but, you know, being able to kind of take that variable out of the equation, especially when you're talking about compliance, is a really powerful thing. We have one last question, Will. I think you covered it. This was asked a little bit earlier during my slide portion. I think you covered it really well. It was really kind of questioning like what we really mean by right time. You covered triggers in your portion of the demo. Is there any other anything else about triggers you want to talk about, or, you know, another example? Because I think the question was about, you know, how would we really define the right time?
That is one of those where there really is no one-size-fit-all elements to it.
Mm-hmm.
The right time is really making sure people get notified when they should be notified. My recommendation here, it's gonna sound like a little bit of a cop-out, is if you have workflow questions, me or my team would be happy to go through the workflow with you and make sure that you guys are setting up your workflows correctly, or making sure that the workflows are configured correctly with the right triggers and the right reviewer. So there really is no one size fit all for the right time here. It's got to be dependent on your workflow, and I'd be happy to take you through the workflow and make sure that we have it set up correctly.
Great. I'll actually connect your team with the person who asked that question, Will. Great. And that is it for the questions, and just under the hour. So Will, first of all, I want to thank you for jumping on today's webinar. I really appreciate it, man. Your insights, as always, are super valuable, and your product demonstrations are second to none. So thank you very much. And I also want to thank everyone that hung out with us toward the end of the call today. I really appreciate your time. As I mentioned, you'll all be receiving a copy of the slides and of the recording as well, even with my technical faux pas. But we really want to say thanks for your attendance today. If you have any questions, please feel free to respond to your contact from Ziflow that reaches out to you with the recording. We'd be happy to answer any questions about how we might help you meet your compliance requirements. All right, with that, I'm going to sign off for today, and I appreciate your time, and have a great day, everybody.